So hey you guys, welcome back to my channel. I'm Rita from Reigning Rita, and I just want to say sorry for such the long hiatus. I wanted to come and make a quick video about tips for anyone that's pre-med, and this is anyone from high school to undergraduate level, and then even our non-traditional, so people who have already graduated with a bachelor's degree. I wanted to come and talk about 3 specific tips that's going to help you tremendously, and it helped me tremendously. I actually ran into a pre-med student today while I was rotating in the operating room, and I was talking to this young man, and I realized, you know, this is probably something that I should put on my channel. So let's get into it. So the first thing that I'm going to talk about is money. Money. Anyone that knows me knows that I go where the money is. I always follow the money, and that relates to almost literally any issue in my life, but specifically for school. They always say, you know, money should never be the motivation, especially when you're in medicine. It should never be the motivation for becoming a doctor. It should never be the motivation for trying to apply to medical school, and I 100% agree with that. What I do also agree with is that it can definitely dictate what institution you go to, and that ranges from undergraduate level, if you want to get a master's in between, and then especially for medical school, because money does matter. One of the greatest tips that I'm going to tell pre-med students is that start searching for the money early on. And luckily, that was something that I had experience doing. When you're in high school, there are tons of scholarships just online that you're able to Google that can literally fit your profile for someone that's pre-med, for someone that's Native American, for someone that lives in Alaska, and simply apply to those scholarships. You can never have too many or too much scholarships, and so that's the #1 important tip that I have to give to students. One thing that I told this pre-med student that I met in the operating room is that at the end of the day, there's tons of scholarships, but the one thing that people don't do is that they tend to shy away from those scholarships that will give you a lot of money. $5,000, $10,000, $20,000, $50,000. But my tip is never shy away from those, because a lot less students are applying to those scholarships. For example, when I was in high school, I applied to be a Dell Scholarship, or Dell Scholar, excuse me, and I also applied to be a Koch Scholar. And these are very prominent and they're very prestigious scholarships that offer a lot of money. I was a Koch Scholar, and side note to Koch Scholars, I met a lot of them in my undergraduate institution as well as where I'm at in medical school, and these are hefty scholarships. $10,000, $20,000 that they are willing to give to undergraduate students. So always look for those scholarships and always apply to them. Even right now, as I'm a 4th year and I'm literally 7 to 8 months away from graduating and starting residency, I am still constantly applying to scholarships. I was just awarded 3 scholarships last month. And what does it take? It takes maybe 20, 30, 40 minutes every night, or maybe even every other night, writing an essay, putting together an application, maybe getting a letter of recommendation here and there from people that would support you and people who would recommend you for this scholarship, and that can turn into $50,000 or $60,000 that you can either put towards undergraduate degree, or you can even put towards your loans in medical school. So always look for these scholarships. On top of that, one thing that I really learned when I was applying to undergraduate school is that I really started focusing on private institutions. Not necessarily that public institutions were bad. I'm from Texas, so we have great schools such as UT Austin, we have the Texas A&M, and we have the Texas A&M system, the UT system, we have Texas Tech. We have all these great private or public institutions. However, I knew that if I went to one of those schools, I was probably actually going to walk out or walk away with a lot more loans than I would have if I went to a private institution but with a bigger endowment. So I ended up graduating from Duke University, and my loans that I had accumulated throughout the 4 years was around $5,000 or $6,000, and that was something that I literally just worked off throughout my 4 years there, and then even afterwards after I graduated. So a school that costs almost $250,000 to go to for 4 years, I was able to walk out with no debt, essentially, because they have a bigger endowment. So another thing for my pre-med students, especially those that are in high school, you want to make sure that you're applying to schools that maybe have a bigger endowment, because they have more money to give you. They could have need-based financial aid that can help you go and attend their schools. They can have, obviously, merit-based scholarships. And on top of that, if you need money, it's easier to ask these private institutions, their loan office, hey, I need another $1,000 because my computer broke. And I'm not really sure how to navigate that kind of conversation with public institutions, because a lot of the time public institutions, they're sharing from a pool from the government, whereas the private institutions, they have all these private donors, and their endowment are usually in the billions. So don't be afraid to go towards those bigger scholarships, as well as look for the schools that have a bigger endowment that can give you more money, so you can walk out with less loans and a less financial burden when you do graduate and get that degree. So that is my first tip. Follow the money. Apply to those scholarships. Take 5 to 10 minutes a day figuring out what you want to say in some essay scholarship application. Get a letter of recommendation really quick, and then finally go to the school that's going to pay you the most. That benefits a lot in the long run. All right, now on to my next tip. So the second tip that I'm going to talk about is just as important as money. Well, maybe a little less important, because I still think money is a very big issue. But I'm going to talk about exposure, because this really revolves around how I was able to really jumpstart my career in medicine, jumpstart my career as a pre-med, and then into medical school, and being able to make all these great connections that I've been able to make. You always want to reach out to people. The only way to get exposure is to reach out to people. Let me say that again. As a pre-medical student, and even as a medical student, the only way to get exposure is to reach out to people. So what do I mean? I mean, if you're in high school, or even if you're an undergrad, find a community health leader. Reach out to them, email them, call them, see if there are any initiatives that you can help with, and start working with them. That is something that I actually did while I was in high school, and specifically when I was in undergrad. I partnered with the NAACP chapter of Houston, in which we did a lot of health initiatives. We had health wellness clinics, we had health fairs, and then I created these very great connections that not only could I write on my CV, but that I could also use and call them if I ever needed a letter of recommendation. So one, reaching out to anyone that's doing any type of health initiative in your community. That's one way to garner exposure. Secondly, a lot of people don't like research, but as someone who's pre-med, either in the undergraduate level specifically, a little less on the high school level, but you can literally cold call, cold email professors, researchers, and say, hey, I'm pre-med, I would love to work in your lab. A lot of the times they are looking for extra hands. I did that when I was in undergrad. I also did that after I graduated. And literally all you have to say is, I'm pre-med, I'm interested in your research, or I would even like to get to know more about your research, and set up a meeting with them. A lot of the times these people have other undergraduate students working in their lab. They have PhD students working in their lab. They're probably the principal investigator of their lab. So they're always willing to add more people if it's really gonna help get the work done. And at that level, you may be doing like the scut work, you may be doing like the cleanings, or whatever that laboratory may involve. But at the end of the day, that's exposure, because again, you can call this person and say, hey, I need a letter of recommendation. Do you mind doing that? Or do you mind writing that for me? And what a lot of people tend to forget is that with this exposure, you're slowly gaining and creating almost a reservoir of experiences. When you worked with a community health leader, do you really like being involved in the community? Do you like health initiatives? Well, then that can kind of garner and tailor what you're going to do in your career. Did you really like research? Did you really like being at the bench and doing basic science? That could also help guide your career. Maybe you want to do an MD, PhD, or maybe you want to go into academic medicine or be at an academic institution. Even if you're not at the bench doing research, did you like clinical research? Did you like pulling charts and looking for people that had certain conditions or certain comorbidities or certain whatever the case may be? So all of this you're doing to gain exposure. And the reason why I say this is so important is because nothing is more important in medicine than the connections that you make. That's highly, highly, highly important. As someone who's applying for residency, I am realizing, well, I've already realized this, but it grows ever important how many people you know and to what depth you know. As a pre-med student, be prepared to get that exposure. It has to be free labor. But luckily, because you're pre-med and because this is something that you want to go into for the rest of your life, because you love helping people, because you want to be a doctor, because you have all these healing hands, you don't mind the free labor. But that's what it's going to take. And just a side note, a lot of pre-med students and even a lot of medical students that are, classes below me, they've always asked, hey Rita, I saw so-and-so did a spotlight on you. It was great. How did you get them to do a spotlight on you? Or, hey Rita, when this person needed to recommend somebody for the scholarship, how did they know to recommend you? How did you pull those strings? And I have to say that the best thing that you can do is give your assistance. Always offer your assistance. For those that know me personally, they know that anytime someone needs help, anytime someone needs a project done, anytime there's anything that can be done to help anything, if I can help, I'm going to help. And it's for two reasons. One, because that's just naturally who I am. If someone needs help, I'm going to help them. If I have the capacity to help someone, I'm going to do that. But the kind of backhand of that is because at the end of the day, when you're continually offering your assistance, and I'm not saying don't offer it to a detriment to yourself, do what you can, but when you're always offering your assistance, when that person has an opportunity, they're going to think of you. They're not going to think of someone else. If you've been working with this community health leader for 2 years, for 3 years, you've shown up to wellness clinics, you've taken blood pressures, you've done this, you've done that, you've garnered a relationship with them. When someone comes to them and say, hey, I have $1,000 that I kind of want to give to a med student, I'm looking for someone to give it to, why would they not think of you? And so that's the kind of mindset that you have to have. You have to get exposure. The only way you can garner these connections that's going to help you grow in this field is if you get the exposure. The only way to get that exposure is if you ask. So don't be afraid to reach out. Don't be afraid to literally Google initiatives that you may be interested in. Google things in your area, Google things, at your institution, and see if anyone just needs help. A lot of the time, they do. A lot of the time, people don't mind literally mentoring undergraduate students, pre-medical students, whatever the case may be, because they either were once in that position or they would just love to help you on that journey. So that is the second tip. Exposure, exposure, exposure. You have to ask. You have to ask to get exposure. And only once you're getting that exposure, only once when you're working with these people, having longevity and meaningful experiences, can you create connections. Once you create those connections, letters of recommendation come easily. Opportunities come easily. Free money. I always believe there's free money. There's a million more people that are richer than me. Free money begin to fall in your lap. So realize, exposure does matter, okay? So that's my second tip. Very, very important, almost just as important as keeping in mind money and that schools will pay for you to go to school. All right. This is my last tip, and this is probably the easiest tip that you can do. This is a tip not just for pre-meds actually, but this is a tip for anyone in high school, undergrad, non-traditional, pre-med, medical students. This is a tip for myself because I constantly have to remind myself to do this. But I am going to start talking about CVs and resumes. What is the easiest way to get together and put together your CV and resume? Okay, so if you listen to my last tip, you started getting that exposure, you started developing those connections. How to transform that and put it on paper? Well, the easiest way to do it is on the very first day. The very first day, get a name and contact for someone at that group. Whether if you're volunteering, whether if you're shadowing, whether you're doing research, get a name and contact, email, phone number. Write that down. For me, I have a Google Doc that says CV, and now it's 2021, so it says CV 2021. Any experience that I do, I write the name and I write the contact. And then literally, as I am doing this experience, whatever the case may be, I am writing down all the skills that I am learning. I'm writing down, I'm charting, I'm tallying, and I'm keeping track of everything. I'll give you an example. When I was a first and second year and I got one of the scholarships to work in a lab, every day when I was working with a PhD student, I would say, okay, what skill is this? What am I performing? What task is this? And she would say, oh, you're doing XYZ. And I would say, okay, great. I'd write XYZ down. Because I know later when I'm actually putting together my CV, it's easy. I have the name, I have the contact, and now the most important thing is that I have concrete evidence of what I did in this exposure. So instead of just saying I participated in, immunology research and I was a research assistant and, I came in from 8 to 5, it was part-time. Instead of just saying stuff like that, you can now say I performed ELISA or I performed DNA analysis via this type of procedure. I was able to incubate 10,000 cells that was later correlated to an increase of 57% in yield, blah, blah, blah. The issue or the key thing is that you want very concrete details, because at the end of the day, everyone on their CV is going to say, oh, I did patient care, I shadowed this doctor, I did this, I did that, I immersed myself in the hospital, and I was, doing all these crazy things. But that's very fluffy, that's very general, and no matter how you, put it, how you form it, that's a very vague sentence. What is patient care? What were you doing? Were you just standing there? Were you looking at the patient? Were you taking their temperature? What were you doing? So that's why I always say, always say, when you're doing an experience, you need to be tallying every specific task that you're doing. Because then when someone ever looks at your application, they can say, oh wow, you actually work with interferon gamma release assay. I did that 2 years ago when I was also in this lab, and that creates talking points for you. So be very, very, very specific. This is the easiest tip that anyone can follow. And that way, when it comes time for application season, whether it's AMCAS or it's ERAS for those in medical school, that way when it comes time for actually putting together your CV or your resume, you're just pulling from that one document. You already have a name, contact, the dates that you worked there, and then you have very concrete detail that you can put as those bullet points for your CV. And I think that is the best way that you can build your CV. A lot of the time, people, especially medical students, we're doing so much. Our school may make us do community service, Our school will offer us research opportunities. We are doing so much. We're studying, we're working on clinical rotations, we're doing all these things, and then we're forgetting to just write it down to keep track of it. And so that's one thing that I always remind myself to do. And I'm actually going to show you guys an example because I tried to practice what I preach. I made an Instagram post. These books are amazing. These are just little I know this is, I'm just talking about tips, but these are just little pages. They're dots. I like to write in blank books. Pages where I write all my notes. Like all my notes, literally, for that rotation. And I keep it, I have one book per rotation, or usually third year I just had one book because I didn't, learning curve, very steep. But again, practice what I preach. This is my anesthesia book. I'm on anesthesia right now. Everything and anything that an anesthesiologist says, an anesthesia tech, a CRNA says that's helpful to me, I write it down in this book. I carry this book with me every day to the rotation. I study from this book when I come home. I write in this book when I'm taking notes, okay? And this is actually a little sloppy, but I'm actually going to transfer it into my book this weekend. But this are my tasks. You see the dates over here. Sorry. You see the dates over there? And you see all these tally marks. So I practice what I preach. All those tally marks, these are things such as if I'm performing an intubation, if I'm assisting in an intubation, or if I'm just observing an intubation. I'm tallying all of those. Because if I'm to go into anesthesiology, when I'm interviewing with someone, or even when I'm going on an away rotation, I want to be able to say, well, actually from July 27th to August 14th, I actually got around 42 intubations, performed 42 intubations on my own. I assisted in 15 of those intubations, and I merely just observed about 12 of those intubations. And all this on the side, I have these little notes. Again, they're sloppy right now, but I'm going to transfer them of all like nerve blocks that I've seen, any nerve blocks that I've assisted in, and then even specific skills that I've learned. So when I say you want to always keep track of everything that you're doing, it's always for a purpose. I'm not doing this because I just want to be able to say, oh, I did 50 intubations as a med student. No, I'm doing this because this is going to serve a purpose later down the road. Whether if it's someone asking about my experience as a medical student applying for anesthesia, whether if it's a resident saying, hey, have you seen a sciatic block before? Where would you do this? Where would you do that? Have you ever assisted in a sciatic block? So always, always, always write down the things that you do, write down the specific tasks that you do, and get proper names. Don't say, for example, tube intubation. Yes, it's a tube intubation, but what kind of tube? You did an endotracheal tube intubation with a scope, with the laryngeal scope. Like, be very, very, very specific, because that tells people that you're always oriented to the details of things. So those literally are my 3 tips. I hope I didn't make this too long. I tried to keep it short. I love when I saw that student in the OR and one of the physicians introduced them to me. I was super ecstatic because I'm always about mentoring. I gave him my cell phone number, gave him my email, and I said, whenever you have any issues, if you have just questions, you can email me, you can text me. I may not respond as fast, but I promise to respond. So I love putting together tips for pre-med students because, I was at a point where I didn't have people that gave me tips, I didn't have mentors. I was really kind of figuring a lot of things out on my own. So I love doing this, and I'm going to try to be more consistent and really just show you guys more about my life and what I'm doing in medical school. So again, I appreciate you guys for watching this video. I tried to make it short. If you have any questions, don't feel free to comment. Feel free to send me, hit me up on Instagram, it's the same name. Hit me up on Twitter, it's the same name. Feel free to email me. And so my email is there, I believe, and it's also on my Instagram. You can email me. I'm never like, oh, people are emailing me. I always want to help people, because at the end of the day, there were points in my life where I didn't have help, which sucked. And then there were points in my life where I had tons of help. I'm blessed to be in the position that I am now, and I would not have made it with the help of others, nor would I have made it without struggling through the points in my life where I had to struggle with no help. So I'm always here to help people. Please, please, please. yeah, but that's all I wanted to say. I'm trying to keep this video as short as possible. I'll try to update you guys on a lot of other things that I'm going through, but I'm actually gonna study for a few more hours before, you know, I eat dinner, and then go back to rotation. So I'll give you an update later, and thank you for making it through this video. Don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe. I know I'm talking really fast, but have a great day.